Nicolás is a PhD student at the University of Wittenherdecke in Germany. He received his master's at the New School for Social Research in New York. He's a member of the elected YSI Community Board, as we just mentioned, and he currently serves as the coordinator of the YSI States and Markets Working Group. So he will now present the YSI Early Career Challenges report, but I would also at this point like to acknowledge the great contributions by other members of the YSI community in establishing and creating this report. That is Akanji Ajibola, Timothy Bizaikaya, Anisha Chigupi, Patricia Couto, Maria Cecilia del Barrio Arleo, who will also give a comment in a moment, and Adam Kerini. Thank you to you all, and we really appreciate all the work that has gone into this report. So after Nicolás provides his brief presentation of about 20 minutes, we will then go through in a round of discussions with 5 discussants who I'll introduce as they come on later. And we will have at the very end of the session, a very brief moment to ask 1 or 2 questions to the investigators of the report. However, the majority of the conversation we're hoping to have with you in the lounge at the tables that the working groups have organized. So we hope that you take your questions and your concerns, your inspirations, and your personal experience that you can relate to the report into those discussions. So with that, I think, again, I would like to welcome you to the YSI Early Career Days. I would really warmly bring onto the stage Nicolás Águila, a great friend to us all. Thank you for leading this effort. Nicolás?
Yeah, thank you, Shay. Thank you so much for your kind words. And let me just start by saying that the YSI community will turn 10 years next year. And if you were a young scholar or that were starting your PhD 10 years ago, now you're probably on a junior position, whether in academia or outside of it. And the problems that you start to face and the challenges that you face have changed a lot. And the result of that, as the YSI community started to grow and people grew older as well, we started to hear that there were several issues that were coming up and that needed to be addressed. And these issues start when you are a graduate student, but then go on to the transition to the job market and even in junior positions in academia or outside of it. These problems are common to most people, I would say, but they are particularly complicated for us, which are trying to do new economic thinking, because we face additional barriers that expelled us from the profession. So, as we were starting to hear more and more that young scholars were facing these issues, YSI decided to establish an early career challenges advisory team in 2019, which started to work on several projects throughout the first 2 years. But then in May 2021, the team was recast with a new composition with the specific purpose to write the report that I'm going to present today, but that we wrote together with the team that Jay just mentioned. So the first thing we did was to conduct a series of interviews to Ysi alumni in order to hear about the stories, the challenges they faced, and also, very importantly for us, is how they managed to overcome those challenges. We interviewed 14 Ysi alumni, which are now in really cool positions, I would say. So somehow they managed to successfully navigate this path, and they have a lot to say and to teach to all of us who are in the process at the moment. So it was also very important for us to interview YSI alumni, because these are people that were part of the community until recently, and they really know from firsthand what are the sort of struggles that we are going through, and they are in an excellent position to give us advice and to support us in our path. So we interviewed 14 of them. 7 were non-academic. They hold junior positions at the European Central Bank, at the Federal Reserve, the IMF, UNCTAD, one union, and one think tank. 6 were academic, holding junior faculty position in universities in the US, Europe, South America, and one was mixed, a person that has a postdoc and works as a consultant for a UN organization. Let me just say that one finding of the report is that the challenges that these people face whether the people that stayed in academia as well as the people who left academia are more or less the same. So we decided to produce only one report instead of two, as we originally intended, under the name of research-related professional careers. So what we're going to hear today are some common challenges that people, young people, new economic thinkers in particular, face both in academia as well as outside of it. Of our 14 interviewees, 9 were women and 5 were men, and 11 were from the global north and 3 from the global south. Also, as many issues that we know are very important because we heard them quite a lot over the years, were not or did not came up in the interviews. So we tried to complement that with secondary literature in order to ensure that these problems were also addressed in the report. So the report has 2 main takeaways. The first one, which is the one that for me is super important, is that the challenges that we face are not our personal problems, not our deficiencies, but really the result of structural barriers. So sometimes when we are alone and isolated, we might feel that these are problems that are due to our own deficiencies or our own characteristics, that we are not good enough. But when you start to see that these are problems that everyone faces, you start to realize that it's not really you, it's the institutional structure and culture of our profession that really forces people to face these challenges. And so for us, it was very important to start to create awareness about these issues in this report, for example, and in the whole early career days, but not really to discourage you, but really to show you that these structural issues exist, and also to show you how others manage to overcome this situation, so you get additional tools to continue with your own path. And also, we found that the best way to succeed or even cope, because there are a lot of people that are suddenly dropping out of this path, is by building strong networks, creating spaces and projects with others, and establishing friendships in service of breaking through the academic isolation. We found that it was very important to organize and to support each other in order to change these institutional structures and culture that I was referring to before, as we don't really want people just to succeed on their own, but what we really want to do is to transform the whole thing so the situation improves for everyone. Some important caveats. So the information here is well-intended advice from people who was recently in your same situation, but that doesn't mean that what worked for them will work for you. So you should take all of this with a grain of salt and try to see if this is something that will be useful for you or not. Then it's also important that if you are struggling, you should seek additional help and advice from friends, colleagues, and even professionals. And finally, that our sample was limited and didn't cover the full range of challenges that are in our professions. So we really want you to get involved with this report. There is a form that accompanies the report in which you can complete the form and add your own experience. And we will review the report periodically, and we will incorporate your additional insights into it. So this is really for us a conversation started and not something final. In fact, we will really welcome your additional input and feedback so we can improve on the report and address some of the challenges that haven't been covered, and in particularly the fact that the report is still pretty much centered in the global north, and we want to get a global perspective. So the structure of the report starts with the challenges and then moves to the advice, and the challenges were organized in a chronological way. We start with challenges that happen while you're a graduate student, then we move on to the challenges that arise when you are transitioning to a research-related professional career, and then finally the challenges that you face once you are in a research-related professional career. So we try to organize this in a way that it was clear how, as you grow and evolve in this career, there are new challenges that appear. But we also presented a subsection discussing transversal issues, as you will see that many of the challenges happen throughout our career path. So let's start with it. Challenges in the graduate student life. So first of all, something that appeared in all or almost all of the interviews is the fact that writing a thesis is very difficult. As some interviewee put it, it's very difficult at both psychological and existential levels. But it becomes even more difficult because of the pressures that young scholars have to publish. So young scholars know that when they will go to the job market, they will need to have some publications in order to get a job. And that really pressures them to try to publish while they are writing the PhD thesis. And this can be very complicated because writing a thesis is already a lot, but also because there is a lack of training in most graduate programs into how to write a paper. So most graduate students don't really know how. And also because publishing takes time. So if you are in a PhD program that lasts 3 years or 5 years, but you have 2 years of courses, then you might have to work 1 year until you have something publishable or even more than that. And then you send it, you get feedback, you work on it, and if you're lucky and it doesn't get rejected, it might take you 1 year and a half or 2 years to get published. So you're really under a tight deadline if you want to reach the job market with a paper. And of course, this can be a source of a lot of stress and anxiety for PhD students. Also, our community is quite interdisciplinary, and we found that there are additional troubles coming from people that are doing interdisciplinary research. First, because of the narrow approach in mainstream economic departments, and also because your thematical fit or topical fit is not very clearly defined. So it will get hard for you to present yourself in a given field. So we had for example, one interviewee that was doing a PhD in history, but he was working on heterodox macroeconomics. And then when we went to the job market, he wasn't really a good fit for either history departments or macro-oriented economics departments. So doing interdisciplinary research, while extremely interesting, is not rewarded. One final point is the relationship with supervisors. We found that they are very important. Good supervisors are people that provide academic feedback, but also emotional support and help you with your publication strategies, among other things. But when this is not the case, you can be really alone and face a lot of additional challenges. So we will hear some advice into how to try to overcome this situation, because it's truly important for graduate students to get some sort of support from someone more senior. So after graduate life, we move on to the transition towards the job market. And there we find several structural issues. The first one, and perhaps the more important one, is that there is a high competition for few academic positions. We found that the academic structure is like a pyramid, and there are too many PhDs for few postdoc positions, and then there are too many postdocs for few teaching positions or permanent lecture positions. So that creates a sort of pyramid that leads to a lot of competition. And because of that, people have to apply to a lot of jobs before they get an offer. There we had a very powerful quote, in my view, is from someone who applied to over 60 jobs, got offers for only 2, one of which was withdrawn. And we also heard people that had to apply to more than 40 jobs or even hundreds of jobs before they were able to get an offer. And this, of course, leads to a lot of stress as well, as you need to get a job, otherwise you will be unemployed. Then this whole problem is compounded by the fact that applications are super time consuming. If you have applying to a position could take you a day or more of work. And if you are applying to hundreds of places, that's hundreds of days of work. And this is because institutions have their own rules. And then you need to tailor your application to the institution that you're applying to if you want to have a chance. And so applying takes a lot of time. It's a skill to be learned. It's not at all intuitive and takes a lot of time. Because of these two reasons, the job market process can be super stressful. People have to spend a lot of time applying, networking, and going to interviews. And it can be mentally really, really tough. Things sometimes random and with things that are really outside your control. Many people said that sometimes they thought they were the perfect fit for a position and they didn't get a call. And other times they thought that there was no way they will get called, and they did. And so this is really seems to be random at some points. Then once you're in a research-related professional career, there are additional challenges. One that was common to all of the interviewees was the lack of research time. For example, we have a quote there from someone that was saying that all of his time was allocated to preparing lectures, to supervisions, to departmental obligations, administrative tasks. So the person didn't really have any time for their own research. That they say is something they do in their free time as a result of this. But also people that stay in academia say that there is a lack of pedagogical training in graduate school. You spend a lot of time working on your research, but then you don't get any training on teaching. And then you get a lecturing position and you have to come up with a course and you don't really know how to do it. Luckily for us, tomorrow we will have a full day dedicated to teaching. So I will really encourage you all to attend that day. And the day after tomorrow, we will have a day dedicated to publication in journals, which will be also very fruitful. So if you have the time, do go to the sessions tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. People that went to non-academic positions reported a lack of training in policy work. They say that there was no training to how to work with data, on how to propose policies or work in a policy context. So they got to their jobs and felt like their education didn't really prepare them for that. And finally, a very important problem for new economic thinkers is that research evaluation topics are biased against heterodox approaches and non-mainstream topics. So if you work with heterodox approaches or on non-mainstream topics, you will find that your institutions, your universities, but also the journals you can get your work published are not super well ranked. And then you will struggle to move up the academic ladder as you are constantly penalized due to the content of your research. About this, INET has a very nice series that you can check out online with a lot of works discussing some of these issues in more detail. And finally, transversal issues. Perhaps the ones that appeared all the time was overwork. Graduate students and professionals as well reported that they were spending a lot of time working, and because of that, they didn't have time to relax or to devote to their friends, family, pursue other interests, and that was a permanent source of stress. And also, there are some personal issues that arise as a result of the nature of our careers. For example, something that appeared quite a lot as well is that people have to move countries, so they are far from their family and friends, and even their partners. And this, of course, also leads to sadness, to the feeling of isolation, and in many cases, mental health issues. Mental health issues are something really pervasive in our discipline. We put there the report of a survey that showed that 18% of economic PhD students in the US were reporting mental health issues, and that was 5 times as more as the general population of their age. So people between 25 and 34 years had only 3.5% reported mental health issues. So this really speaks about how our career really puts a lot of stress and anxiety into graduate students. Then we also found that there were discrimination against women and LGBTQ plus individuals. This discrimination takes several forms. First is underrepresentation throughout the career. There are less women and LGBTQ plus individuals in bachelor's, but then the situation gets worse. Master's, PhD, and especially in faculty positions. And then they we put there also the reports of service showing that they experience a lot of verbal abuse and harassment, even including sexual assault in some cases. We also found the issue of precarious positions. There are a lot of junior positions that are really low paid and short term. So of course, this leads to a lot of stress because the junior scholars that are working on them have no sorts of security in their employment, which doesn't lead to good conditions to continue their work, but also can lead to problems outside of it. Some of these issues are even worse in the case of researchers coming from the Global South, which experience lack of funding and discrimination. This also takes several forms. One of them is that students or graduate students from the Global South cannot really afford studying in the Global North due to the cost of tuition, due to the lack of scholarships, especially in heterodox institutions. And the universities in the Global South are systematically put in lower ranks due to the biased nature of ranking systems. So this really hinges the progress of people coming from the Global South. And also additional facts are there are some language barriers that prevents them from publishing in top-ranked journals in English, and the fact that journals in their home languages are also ranked lower due to the biases that we were referring to before. And the issue of the lack of funding is really important for several reasons. They cannot travel to conferences or get their work known, or even acquire basic resources such as books or journal articles. The final transversal issue is discrimination against Black, Asian, and ethnic minorities. Again, we found that they are severely underrepresented. Only 3%, for example, in the US of economic PhD students are Black, and only 3.8% come from Hispanic or Latin origin. And these percentages are more or less similar in faculty position and also in bachelor's and master's. But they also get discriminated against due to several channels, and topics of race are severely penalized in mainstream economic journals. So we depicted a very problematic and very complicated situation. But we also wanted to show you that that some people managed to successfully navigate that, and they have some learnings and stories to share with us into how they managed to do so. So we have some better tools to do that on our own paths. So one big recommendation was that you need to get a support team and start a network. That was very important. That it is important to discuss your preliminary research work, to get feedback and to improve your work, and also to run, if you can, some mock interviews to prepare to go to the job market. Also, they recommended that you should build your network while pursuing research. If it's available for you, you should join organized support networks or professional associations, or build your own. in some of the interviewees had actually built their own initiatives to network with people, to be with people, and to discuss their work. Also, they recommended using the resources at your university, if you have them. And finally, to ask as many questions as you can to people who are in academic boards or hiring committees, so you better know what to expect in this situation. They also recommended to get teaching or research assistantship positions, because that will give you a cool experience that might help you in the job market and then getting a job. Still, this is not out of controversy, because you will get an additional burden to doing your PhD, but still could be helpful later on. Then on the topic of publishing research, they were saying that you shouldn't be too hard on yourself if it takes you some time to get your first articles published, because the academic process can be very long. Also, that you shouldn't feel bad if you get rejected, because this happens to everyone. And they recommended that you should spend some time thinking where you want to send your articles, and maybe tailor them a little bit to the journal that you're sending them to increase the chances of them getting published. And finally, they also recommended to consider publishing working papers, so you get your work out there and start discussing it, and you get the chance to improve it. They also suggested that it was good to plan for the future. The earliest that you know what you want to do, the earlier you can start to prepare for that and take the necessary step to get prepared when the moment comes. They also, regarding the topic of application and interviews, they suggested to apply only to positions where you really see yourself working and living. If not, that's a waste of time, of precious time that you don't necessarily have. But after you apply, they recommended going to all the interviews that you get, because even if you don't end up getting the position or you don't want to go there, they are great learning experiences and you can get excellent feedback. They also said that it was important to negotiate your offer, because often academic institutions give you a very low offer, and then you have to negotiate a lot to get a better offer. And finally, that you shouldn't feel discouraged or take it personally if you get a rejection, as we know, as we discussed previously, people have to apply to a lot of jobs to get one. And finally, they emphasized a lot the issue of time management. They said that it was very important not to let the pressures of academia to affect your personal life and relationships, that you should take care of them, take care of you, take breaks and spend time relaxing, doing other activities that you love, spending time with friends, families, and pursuing your passions. And finally, that you shouldn't feel forced to take a lot of commitments, because it's important that you defend your own research time and learn how to say no and to set boundaries, especially if a lot of people are asking you to do a lot of different things that really don't help you to move forward. So this was very quickly an overview of the whole report, but let me just emphasize again that for us, this is really a conversation starter. We really want this report to be a living document that will continue to evolve with your input. So please, if you want to add your experience or give feedback, complete the form, and let's continue this conversation later with the comments and the Q&A and in the breakout sessions. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nicolás. Really a tremendous effort, and thank you for the succinct presentation of the results. So we encourage you to all go into the report that Heska's just posted and take a look yourself. It's really worth a read, and I think you can all relate to some or all the themes that are being presented. And in that spirit, as we said earlier, this report and the YSI community in general is not just about new economic thinking, new research, better research, pluralism. It's really also about us as people. And this is really what we want to be focusing on now with this report, as the conversation started, Nicolás has said, but also with the voices we want to bring now to the table as discussants. And these are all amazing people you'll see in a moment. I'll introduce each one of them. but they're our mentors, partners, and alumni of YSI. They're all supporters of what we do as a community. So thank you for being here, and I would really welcome them now to each one give a few comments and thoughts on the report, and maybe related to their own personal experience, just anecdotally. So first off, I really warmly welcome to the stage Fiona Tragena, who is a longtime mentor of YSI. Thank you so much for being here. She holds the DST NRF South African Research Chair in Industrial Development and is Professor of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. She has a PhD in Economics from the University of Cambridge. Fiona, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jay. And thanks for the invitation to be part of this fantastic event and such a valuable series. Personally, I really enjoyed the report and its rich insights, the honest reflections, and also the really practical orientation. And I also learned a lot from it myself, and it gave me an opportunity to reflect on how I can strengthen my own supervising and mentorship. So I'm going to just give 5 reflections, drawing on the report and also drawing on my own experience in hiring and promotion committees, including as an external member in different country contexts. And because there's not enough time to cover everything on early career challenges, I decided to just focus on the job market part and the part about getting a job, not what comes after that, even though that's also important and challenging, and the report does also cover that. So just whizzing through this. Firstly, I would suggest considering very carefully your own job market goals, and especially where you plan on getting a job in terms of country and what kind of institution. So whether academic or not, what kind of ranking of institution and so on, because the context of what sort of jobs one is aiming for, I think matters a lot for what to prioritize. As the report points out, it's really difficult to do everything during the PhD, to finish in quick time, to publish, to teach, and so on. So the job market goals in terms of the context of where one is aiming to work, I think has got strong implications for what to prioritize amongst those many things that one can't do all of them. So whether to prioritize gaining teaching experience or getting a publication out or kind of racing through it in quick time or whatever. So it's important to familiarize oneself with what matters most, specifically in the context where one is hoping to get a job. And then secondly, to take account of the reality, perhaps an unfortunate reality, that where someone does their PhD does still matter a lot in terms of institution and country. And we can debate that, we can try to change perceptions over time, but it is a reality to grapple with on the job market. So I think for somebody who did their PhD out of the global north and not at one of the top ranked and well-known institutions in the global south who wants to apply in the global north, or even within the global north, someone from a less high-ranked institution, do need additional ways of signaling quality. Because otherwise, even if your dissertation itself is brilliant, the danger is just being screened out at the initial stage because the dissertation itself won't be read in that initial stage. So whilst someone from a top institution has the luxury of maybe breezing through the first stage on the basis of the institution and the supervisor's credentials, somebody else, even with an equally strong or better thesis, needs something to stand out. So it could be more important to maybe get an article accepted during the PhD or whatever, even if it might mean taking slightly longer with the PhD. So I think those are the kinds of choices and trade-offs to consider. And then thirdly, as we know, there's so many applications for any one job these days that it's really important to think of things that can differentiate one's own application. I don't think, for example, in terms of publications that more than one accepted publication is needed during the PhD. But if there is an accepted publication, it sends a really good signal. Or even an R&R from a good journal, or a working paper, conference presentations, even a grant, even if it's something small, anything that can help one's application to stand out from the many applications which are coming in. And for example, in terms of conference presentations, during this COVID time, with most conferences still being either virtual or hybrid, it's actually a great opportunity to get in a couple more conference presentations at very little cost, usually in terms of time or finances, compared to pre-COVID times. And those conference presentations, again, can be like one easy way of boosting one's CV. Then fourthly, in collaborations with well-known researchers can have a powerful signaling effect, as well as hopefully a productive learning and growth experience. So I think even if one does most of the work, of course, without being exploited, but even if one does most of the work, it may actually be worth it in the long term. And then fifthly, for early career researchers who are already done with a PhD and maybe a postdoc or a few years into academia, I think it's clear that more is expected. And just looking in the past years when I've been in a range of hiring processes internationally, I've noticed a growing emphasis on grants. So if someone is applying for example, in the European system, a senior lecturer or similar type of level, it would typically be expected that they would have at least got one reasonable grant. And so just in closing remarks, I really believe that each person who's doing a PhD, no matter how brilliant or perhaps how arrogant, each person goes through moments of self-doubt about whether they should even be doing a PhD and whether they'll ever finish, whether they'll ever get a job. And one of the things that I really value in the report is recognizing and underscoring how common these challenges are, and that even though people may feel isolated or feel that those are a reflection on themselves individually, it's important to recognize how common these experiences are, even whilst on the other hand, of course, recognizing the differences in experiences by gender, by class, race, age, nationality, and so on. So I think networks such as Ysi and events such as this are really crucial, both for sharing practical information and for sharing experiences and solidarity. And the very last thing I would mention, just as a advert, is that in my center we have postdoc positions available, open right now. We've just opened an advert with a pretty short closing date, based in here in Johannesburg, research positions, and maybe I'll try and post something in the chat with information about that. Would really love to get applications from people who are in this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for your wonderful words. And indeed, I want to second what you just said. I think the fact that we bring these conversations into a more open format, we're all reluctant to have these conversations because we're doubting ourselves, and it's something we don't want to share. That's one of the big insights of the report that Nicolás mentioned. And we want to bring these conversations out into the open and have a trusted environment such as this one today. So thank you so much for your words. Up next, I'm really happy to welcome to the stage Olga Mikheeva. She is currently a research fellow at the public banking at UCL, the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, IIPP. She holds a PhD in public administration and technology governance from Caltech in Estonia, and is currently a Marie Curie fellow, research fellow at the UCL IIPP. During her PhD research, which had a focus on developmental states, financing of innovation, and financial bureaucracy, she was also serving as the coordinator of the Ysi Economics of Innovation Working Group. So she's a really treasured Ysi alumni. Thank you so much for being here, Olga. We're looking forward to your thoughts.
Jay, Nicolás, everyone, thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed tremendously reading the report. It's a great start of great kickstart of that conversation, and it can be at times difficult conversation, but it's great to see that those topics are outlined in a very good, straightforward way there, and it's also very. I'm happy to see that this is the report is meant to be continuously upgraded. So I'm also happy that I can direct my own students who, let's say, are working on their master thesis at the moment, to their assignment, to something tangible and meaningful, and potentially also to contribute perhaps to the second version of report. I think let me perhaps make a few comments I came up with while reading the report. A lot of things, of course, resonated very well also with my own experience of doing a PhD research, of doing my current research work after I finished PhD. Perhaps to start with, I felt something that I only realized retrospectively, that in academia, the seniority might come, or the title of senior position might come later than in some other professions, professional fields. And that might create some sort of a mismatch between, let's say, seniority in terms of the job title, or let's say research experience, because, you know, the progress is quite slow. The deep research work involves a long time horizons. So the mismatch between the senior job title or research experience might sometimes be in contrast with actually our biological sense of experience, or being more experienced in life. So I think that might be part of the frustration. You know, we finish, let's say we get a PhD degree, let's say in our 30s, and then let's say reach tenure or professor position years later. So I feel like research doesn't speak to this, but that was something that I found perhaps can cause some frustration along the way. Another thought I had was that the PhD degree not always, or very rarely, perceived as it's a qualifying exam for a person to be able to be admitted to the academic circle. And it's a long journey, but very rarely we'll perceive it as a qualifying exam. And I think realizing that, or talking about it in those terms, might also help reduce the burden, which particularly at the initial phases of our PhD journey, we would think of, I have to produce the best PhD dissertation. I have to just make it, you know, ideal. So, of course, excellence is important, and setting ambitious goals, it's also important. But you know, the other side of the coin is could be, especially at the beginning of research work, could be a little bit distracting or destructive. Here, so in that sense, there are many ways of doing PhD research, postgraduate research work, and it was particularly interesting, and I was particularly happy to see that someone also mentioned policy work, and there is obviously a very rapidly growing interest or acknowledgement of importance of public engagement in one form or another, because we would like to speak to a broader societal issues, challenges, that, and to see our research work within that broader framework. So, you know, it can be also small things that you can start developing during your PhD work. This is not just to put another agenda on the to-do list. Of course, there are many things that the report also lists that PhD researchers have to combine: teaching, marking, let's say supervised students, own research. But for example, setting smaller projects with your peers, some sort of the pet projects that just make you feel good. They might not necessarily hit or be a very terribly important line in your CV, but that can be that can make you feel good and bring a good purpose to your research work. So choosing smaller projects that can be completed relatively easy or in a shorter time with your peers, I think that helped me a lot. And of course, Ysi was or remains as the platform for doing just that. But that could be also, you know, writing a small op-ed or writing even a small blog could bring you back to that, you know, why I'm doing this, why my research is important in a nice way. Another perhaps point I marked for myself here is some I think echoing what Fiona mentioned, signaling about the quality of your research or seriousness of your research intentions, interests, but also how there are many ways how to signal your independence, because after all, what you would like to become is an independent researcher, that you could set your own research agenda and of course work with research groups too. But I think this is what when universities are hiring early career researchers, this is something I think they're also looking at. And I think that you can signal it, of course, through your research work, through publications, but you can also signal about your growing independence as a scholar through different ways. And some administrative or organizing things can also be can also bring this type of signal to your CV. Perhaps being selective if you can, that would be great. But coordinating, let's say, involving, engaging with, let's say, associations, becoming a coordinators of certain groups, that could be a nice way, I think, of doing that. And perhaps, to conclude, the last point would be, never get disappointed that with rejections, very hard. But if you take that, that's an exercise, and that's super okay to pull out your manuscript from a journal, for example, when you got an RR, but you really do not agree with reading of reviewers or with the comments. It's also totally okay not to agree. And rather than really traveling a long journey, trying to really radically revise your paper, it's also okay to ask yourself, say, well, maybe, or just to tell yourself, well, maybe I do not fully agree with this, and maybe I can submit it to another journal. Although, of course, there might be some time considerations that can affect decision. Overall, I hope I'm, that would be my perhaps last comment. And I just very much looking forward to see also the next editions of this wonderful work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga, and it's really great to hear your thoughts. I was personally thinking about a lot of new things that we should be thinking about as we evolve this space. And I think this is also food for discussion that we're going to have afterwards. So thank you, Olga. So now let's move over to the next discussant, and a fellow investigator with Nicolás of the report. Maria Cecilia de Barrio Olio is a former coordinator of the YSI Finance, Law, and Economics Working Group. She earned her PhD from University of Trento and is currently a research associate at the European Banking Institute after completing the ECB's graduate program. Maria, it's really great to see you. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for this opportunity to share a bit our, I said our because together with Nico and the team, we thought about all these issues. So it's a bit more of an insider view from a certain perspective. I just wanted to be perhaps very brief on some points that I consider kind of key to highlight. So I think that with all this COVID situation, I think everyone became a bit more aware of all these issues connected to mental health and the need to talk about these things. So I think even though these early career challenges was thought even before COVID, and actually I remember when I was doing the last year of my PhD, and this was put on the table in the Festival of Economics of Trento by some former YSIers, I was really excited because I was like, yes, this is what I need to figure out my life now that I'm finishing and I'm in this kind of transition period. And so now I welcome very much that this is actually materialized. And I think that there are a couple of important takeaways from the report, and that I feel particularly close to my experience. So I think that when one starts this PhD journey, it's a bit of this kind of conception that we need to figure out or have many things figured out already. And then as things evolve, we realize that actually nothing is clear, and therefore, I don't know, at least in my experience, and it's partially what also the report shows, we feel a bit kind of as if we're facing the world kind of naked and with nothing to deal with certain situations. So I think that this journey, it's difficult because it put us in front of these needs that, I mean, on the one hand are more technical in a sense. So perhaps we discover the things that we need to go deeper into in terms of technical skills, research, but also highlights many other and more important aspects that are more connected to our psychological lack or some tools that we need in order to kind of manage properly certain situations. So I would invite the readers of the report and actually those who are currently transitioning also this, well, the PhD phases or even this transitioning path at this moment to kind of take these things more as an opportunity, in the sense that I know it's easier said than done. But actually, if we focus perhaps way too much on the kind of things that we're lacking from this technical and from this more psychological perspective, it's very easy to kind of feel immediately feel bad about the whole situation. But actually, if we kind of concentrate or try to see it more as a growing opportunity or as a step forward, I think this is kind of the key to sort of transform a little bit the experience. Because I feel, or at least what happened in my case, was that I was always feeling all this pressure of doing all the things like in this sort of perfect way or in a sort of terminated fashion. But actually, from what from what the report kind of shows and also the previous speakers, it's that this is actually more of a fluid state and it's more of a journey, and there is no final stage as such. Of course, once we submit the thesis, we believe that this is the case, but actually the submission of the thesis or even the defense of the thesis is a bit more of a starting point for something else. So I think it's important to just focus on those two aspects first. Try not to concentrate on the lack of things, but actually on the opportunities of this journey. And then this is something in any case that I sometimes continue struggling with, but see all these products of our work and our research more of not a final thing, or just by taking away this pressure of the perfectionism and this kind of final product. I think it also helps evolving these conversations, and perhaps, as also Olga was mentioning, having these smaller projects or these other networks also helps in kind of developing this sense of ongoing work. I mean, of course, at some point everyone needs to submit something, but this is not some kind of final judgment thing. And so this is what I wanted to kind of point out. And I hope that this living document keeps on growing and also, inspiring more people. And as Nico also said, this is not something that it's like a sacred advice. So of course, everyone is more than welcome to talk to professionals and reach out to friends, which I think it's also one of the key things, just to kind of break a little bit the taboo. But I hope that the report inspires and keeps on growing as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Marianne. Those are really warm and honest words, and I think your contribution together with the others to shaping the report and hitting this tone for the report is really amazing. And I think we can all feel it. It's a much, as you said, a fluid state, and that has to transcend into what we experience in our wider existence, in the feeling space, as much as we do in our rational space, which we usually live in. So again, I want to just reemphasize this same point you just made, which is we're trying to navigate exactly all the space that we experience as human beings, and take us as a whole human with all our experiences, and that's what this community really is hoping to achieve overall. So with that, I would like to now invite a wonderful former YSI coordinator and great friend as well, Tinashe Nyamunda, associate professor at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. He completed his PhD on African financial history at the University of Zimbabwe. And like I mentioned, he served as the coordinator of the YSI Africa working group for several years. Great friend, great YSI alumni, and great now also becoming mentor to the YSI community. Tinashe, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Jay, and thank you for including me on this very interesting platform. I hope I can keep my talk short and sweet as well. Well, I suppose it's on a bit of a negative note, so to speak. It's meant to inspire rather than to discourage what I'm about to say. But I think it's something that every young scholar should take into consideration. So I just jotted down a few points emanating from the report itself. A number of issues came up, and a lot of these issues had to do with the challenges that early career scholars face, whether it has to do with mental health issues and numerous other things. So my first point, looking at the scholar themselves rather than the experience that they go through, is that, and this is a difficult one. Academia is not for everyone. Right? So I'm starting from this point, but I will go through to the point where I'll say whatever I think about how academics can navigate the early career journey until they attain their MAs, PhDs, and proceed to secure employment. But they need to know about the pitfalls. They need to know about the challenges that they're going to face. So the first thing is that academia is not for everyone. It is indeed a long-term commitment. If you calculate the time that you start from your undergrad, doing your honors, going through your MA, and having to then do a PhD, depending on the context of the country that you're coming from, it's a very long journey. So before you get on this journey, this is a commitment that you want to make so that you're not disappointed after 10 or 15 years of working on this and you feel like you're not getting the results that you wanted and you feel like you've wasted all of these years. So before you get into it, be very sure that this is exactly what you want to do and this is something that you're passionate about. If you want to be rich, then academia is not for you. That is something that I think many people, at least in the part of the world that I come from, sometimes don't question or realize. It's really just about your passions, about the contributions that you want to make in terms of teaching, in terms of research, and numerous other elements that come with academia. So if you want to be rich, I suggest you pursue a completely different field, and especially in the humanities. Academia is about those people committed to what they want to do. Having an academic job allows you to at least survive, to look after your family and so forth, but really it's about the passion that you have in terms of your research. Another point is that if you're not prepared to put in the work, adjust your attitude, network, follow certain conventions, even if you want to challenge certain conventions, you challenge them in certain ways, then academia again is not for you. Research can be quite frustrating. Interacting with other people, sending an article out for review and getting a very nasty second reviewer, all of those things can be quite frustrating. So you need to have a positive attitude towards all of those things. Some of the comments you may get about your work may be unfair. In certain instances, it may not be well received. So it's about the mindset that you get, that you create when you get into this, to be prepared that you're not always going to be successful. You're always going to face challenges, and it requires you to continue working hard, improving yourself, and trying to prove to yourself that your work has quite a lot of worth. So all of those points come under the point that I was trying to make, that academia is not for everyone. So the second point is, if you want to become an academic, then be fully prepared for a very interesting journey without any guarantees. I've just mentioned all of these points. You can be a very successful PhD student, but you are not necessarily guaranteed of a job. The report mentioned how there are so many PhDs out there and very few postdoc positions and even fewer academic jobs that are available. So you should get into that knowing that it's a very cutthroat industry and there's a lot of competition. So there are no guarantees. You're not guaranteed of a job. You're not guaranteed even of success in publishing, at least at the outset. You know, you might have a few rejections. I know I've had a few rejections from some journals, but that's part of the process, right? You may not be guaranteed of initially raising funding or fellowships. And as an early career scholar, if you come across these kinds of challenges, you can become not just disappointed, but discouraged as well. The idea is to try and see what you might have been missing, the problems you might have been facing, the issues that you might need to work on, and look at those who've successfully done that. Seek the correct mentorship, seek the correct supervision, look at whatever funding guidelines there are and see if you can follow them closely. And ultimately, you will find that rhythm and you will find a way to go through it. Another thing is research itself is very difficult. As a PhD student, I had one chapter that I had to revise over 7 times. And, you know, I eventually got to a point where I was about to give up. And then my supervisor, God bless him, because, you know, he was so patient with me, and you're not always going to get that, actually said, go off for holiday, go off for a month, come back when you're refreshed, and then we will resume from then. So you're always going to get these frustrations, whether it's in research, it's in the chapters that you submit. So you should be prepared for all of that. Another thing is that, you know, there's a diversity of academics out there, and you're going to face all sorts of frustrations, including discrimination, whether it's racial, whether it's about gender, whether it's about sexuality, whether it's about which part of the world you come from, whereby people may not take you seriously in terms of what you want to contribute. So all of those things are things that you should get into academia knowing that you will encounter these things at some point in your career, maybe more often than you think. And if you eventually encounter them and you're prepared, mentally prepared to confront those issues and navigate them, I think you'll be better placed to deal with the issues that you will come across. So the negative stuff out of the way, my suggestion is to do what you can in terms of networking. And when you're doing research, like the report said, the PhD should not be a long journey. I think, first of all, it's about your particular interests, what you're passionate about researching about, what you want to contribute into academia. Having said that, I will tell you one thing. To you, your thesis will change the world. When I was writing my thesis, I thought it would be groundbreaking and it would, you know, bring all sorts of interesting arguments and so forth, you know, to those people in my field. But often, to everyone else, it is just another thesis that is going to be read by less than 10 people or something like that. But that's not the important point. For me, the important point is that a PhD is like a driver's license. You may know how to drive. In other words, you may know how to engage scholarship. You may know how to engage in debate and arguments with other scholars. But without a PhD, it is difficult to prove that point. So a PhD is simply a way of allowing you to be able to join that particular community of scholars where they will respect you and at least look at that qualification as something that demonstrates that you've gone through that rites of passage, whereby you know how to research and you know how to put together, you know, the research work or arguments or whatever in an acceptable way that other people have given a stamp of approval. Now, what is critical in all of this is that for me, the journey, like I said, might appear like a lonesome journey. But through the experiences that Jay was talking about, it doesn't have to be. I've just mentioned all of these challenges, right? Whether it's about discrimination, whether it's about all of these challenges that you're going to face in terms of your research, maybe you've got an uncooperative supervisor or whatever it is. There are numerous platforms that can allow you to be able to create certain connections. And one of them certainly is YSI. And my own journey was made much easier because of the kinds of networks and connections that I made as a YSI member, and certainly as one of the coordinators at the, at the Young Scholars Initiative. I don't want to take too much time here, but what I want to do is to encourage all these early career scholars to be aware of the pitfalls, to be fully aware of the challenges that they have to face, and to commit to engaging them. And once you do that, I think it makes your journey a lot more easier, because you know what to expect. And if you know what to expect, you know what you need to do in order to confront some of those challenges. And certainly getting into these networks, such as YSI or whatever other networks that you find in your field, don't be afraid to engage senior scholars. Don't be afraid to engage some of those other PhD students who are working in a similar area as you. Don't be afraid to apply for anything, or to apply for yourself in submitting a paper for publication or whatever it is. All of that is part of the learning process. And once you're done with the PhD, despite having very few guarantees in terms of what comes next in your future, at least you're better placed to know how to navigate and to know how to try to place yourself in that community of academics to be able to secure a job going forward. So I think this is the point I really want to drive home. Use these platforms such as YSI, because it's a huge community. The Africa working group that I was part of, I'm not sure how many. It started with less than 5 people, and now we're talking of thousands across the continent. Utilize those platforms. Listen to the other challenges that other people have faced. You realize you're not alone, and you've got other people to fall back on. I'll be happy to discuss this further, but I think that's my message to all the early career scholars that will listen to this. Thank you, Jay.
Well, Tinashe, and all the discussants so far, I'm really personally touched, maybe on behalf of the community, for hearing your really heartfelt thoughts and so many deep insights that I've heard over a couple of beers here and there, but I think it's just now also there for all of us to experience together as a community and to draw from this together. So I think it's amazing to hear these words from all of you so far. So I won't summarize what you said, Tinashe. There were so many things you just said that hit home for me personally as well. But thank you. I would really, like you said, there's a discussion happening afterwards. So I would like to encourage you all to come to the tables and to go to whichever group that you feel most home with and discuss with the coordinators and our discussants here further. But finally, I'm really also quite happy to have with us today William Hynes. And William Hynes is a great partner of INET and also of YSI. And I would like to briefly introduce you to the community, because I'm not sure you're a well-known person yet, but you will be in the future. So William is a senior advisor to the Secretary General and the head of the New Approaches to Economic Challenges Unit, NAEC at the OECD, which provides a space to question traditional economic ideas and offer new economic narratives, new tools, methods, and policy approaches. In this capacity, he recently launched the Genesis Initiative, which stands for Government Economists for New Economic Systems Initiative, which YSI will proudly join. Perhaps we'll hear briefly about this initiative, because it sort of helps us understand another pathway into government and policy jobs that is not necessarily an academic pathway, which William is now trying to help with YSI establish a more clear pathway for. He's, of course, had a long career, so I won't list all his achievements, but I do want to say that he was a associate fellow and an adjunct professor in international economics at the Johns Hopkins University of Advanced International Studies, and he has a doctorate from Oxford University, and was also, like others in the room, a Marie Curie Fellow at the London School of Economics. William, it's really great to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Jay. And I must say, hanging out with you guys, saying that I have a long career, it doesn't feel that way, but I feel like one of you. But let me just share some thoughts on the report, which I very much enjoyed, and I wish there was something similar when I was a graduate student all those years ago. But the line that sort of stuck with me as I went through this, and the kind of quote, was from George Bernard Shaw: the reasonable man adapts himself to the world, the unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. And I got a sense from this report that it was all a bit too reasonable. And one line in particular, the sooner you figure out where you want to go, the better. And this sort of analogy of the map and the territory, I think, is well used, and Rob Johnson has used it. But I think there is no real map that we have to follow. Or rather, if you want to take the reasonable route or the safer path, then I think it is a little more well known where you should go and what you should need to do. But I guess for people in the new economic thinking movement, it's more about being unreasonable and perhaps finding new paths forward. I think the math that you're facing is pretty intimidating. The number of PhD candidates has greatly increased, so there's a lot more competition, but it's also the case that there's a lot more students at university. So it seems that the problem will be which will grow faster. In the past, you had a smaller world, but it's always been a pyramid. And even in the paper, you talk about top universities, and that means that you've accepted that there is a hierarchy and see things in terms of how high can we get in the hierarchy. But perhaps the pragmatic approach is to get into graduate school as high as you can in the hierarchy, but then to choose to apply to places where people do things that interest you and where all decisions are not made on the rigid conventional criteria. And I think also one of the emphasis of the report is, it's all a big competition and how can you stand out? But cooperation is also really important. And that's why I think the YSI network is so great. And you don't want to necessarily end up in a place where they tell incoming students that only half of you will come out of here with a degree. That sort of atmosphere in that place can be very trying. And it's also not only about competition. So there are other schools that say, unless you do something dreadful or you put no effort in, you'll get your PhD. So work with your fellow students and do what interests you. This isn't a competition, but a cooperative venture. I think that is really important to emphasize. And I think that, this idea that you should choose what really you find interesting is essentially my point. But I think there is a tendency to get overwhelmed by all of the other issues that are mentioned in the report. And I think these are legitimate. They're the realities of being a graduate student. I think increasingly being an academic, it's less about a career than a devotion. It's really about putting in a whole effort. It's extremely tough. There's major work-life balance issues, and it's not clear how to excel and to get as high up on the hierarchy while pursuing your interests. So those are all real challenges and a very interesting discussion. But I think the tone of the report is often very negative. And in the introductory comments we heard, about it's intimidating, it's precarious, there are uncertainties. But you should also remember from a seasoned person like me that it is the best time of your life. I mean, I think the more experience you get and the more studies you do, you think this opens up more and more opportunities. But the reality is, once you start to make choices, the path gets narrower and narrower. So you're in that space now where there's anxieties and there's challenges, but these days won't come again. So try to make the best of it and be open to things and get involved in as many things as you can and explore intellectually. And I think, the idea is not just getting a degree. It's the way you think about the world is really shaped in what you're doing now. And there'll be no time to do that later. So in terms of intellectual development, this really is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Let me transition to policy, because of course it's not just about academic careers. There are other ways forward if you want to pursue new economic thinking. And there is a debate that Jay and others have been involved in about whether the change that we want to see in economics is going to come from academic institutions where academics can retreat into their beliefs. And again, INET has done such a great job on the crisis of conformity, or whether the change could come from policymaking institutions where you can't hide from your mistakes and you will be held accountable. So perhaps there is more scope for trying new things. But there's also great conformity and conservative nature in government institutions and international organizations. But I think what we're trying to do is in Genesis is to try to show to people that they aren't alone, that there is a community of people who are trying to push for more radical approaches, and that will be disruptive. it's some of the challenges we face. We can't just continually try to increment our policy frameworks. We really do need to challenge the conventional wisdom and to disrupt the system. So that's essentially what we're trying to do with Genesis, and I hope that later on, when you go into careers, you might look us up and try to get involved in the network. But this network also faces enormous challenges in that the empire is very much striking back and doesn't necessarily want people who are looking at things in different ways to be organizing and to team up. So we'll see how that works out. But I'm incredibly encouraged by the discussion and by the report. It's not easy, but my advice to you would be to be as unreasonable as reasonable. Thanks.
Well, William, thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. I think the tone of the report should not appear negative. And you're right about the exciting time. We like to talk in YSI about a playground of ideas and bring back the intellectual energy that should be here when you think about and talk about ideas, the imaginative space, which often when you're becoming an academic and you conform to the methods, you kind of lose, and it's just becoming a technicality. And we don't want to become only technocrats. Some of us will go down that path, but we have to at least have spaces in which these big questions and our real interests can be fully lived out and fulfilled. And that's also one of the big sort of, I just might mention, like one of the secret things about YSI that people don't really understand if you talk about it too widely. But one of the things that makes YSI stand out is that you can use YSI to complement any existing environment you're currently in, and you can recreate some interests outside of that. Almost like what Olga was saying earlier, have that little side project that keeps you motivated, that keeps you fresh, that keeps you in the game, if you will, because it is more a marathon than a sprint, and it is more about perseverance rather than being brilliant in every moment. So I think those are things that we have to understand. We've all sort of committed to this path in some way because we're somehow on a path of new economic thinking together. That's why we're in the community. That's why we're gravitating towards each other. And now we just need to sort of build out the space that we can actually live in this space and recreate spaces for us so that it's as bearable and rewarding as possible. And I really want to also, at this point, really thank everybody, both Nicolás and the team for the report, for opening the space, but all the discussants, for all the voices that are now sort of helped us really see that there are so many nuances that we still need to fully bring out, and both in a collective conversation, but also in personal conversations. I think one big message is, yes, you're not alone. And yes, you can open up to others, and we have to protect this space for us in which we can be intimate, that makes YSI such a wonderful space that we all want to be part of and continuously want to be part of. So with that, I think let's take this space right into the discussion tables. I would like to close the session. Thank everybody on behalf of the entire community. I'm really proud. Also would like to acknowledge on behalf of the YSI Community Board, Lillian is representing us here for that today. This is an effort where we've all thought about creating the space and putting this bit more systematically in front of us. And it will take some work and some effort by all of us to imagine these spaces. Keep an open mind about what topics you'd like to focus on in the future. We're going to do this every next time is scheduled in March that we want to do the next YSI Early Career Days. Tomorrow is focused on teaching. So if you're thinking about becoming a teacher, which if you stay on the academic path, you will likely have to do or want to do, tomorrow is completely dedicated to teaching. And as we mentioned, Saturday is dedicated to publishing and writing. And I think these are all important points that we want to sort of start getting into some high level, but also practical considerations and conversations with each other about all these different aspects that we have to encompass as young scholars and early career researchers. And again, I'm just welcoming us all now to the tables. Let's go over, bring your drinks. And join the working groups for a further discussion of the report.